Laurel and Brian Poremski's dreams came true when they had the child they'd always wanted. Isabella was born and came into their lives, and they became a happy family. All was well for 5 years. Isabella was bright and ahead of other kids her age, so when they found a house of their dreams going for cheap, they thought it was luck. Then, one day, Isabella began talking to someone named Emily. Laurel and Brian thought their daughter had created an imaginary friend. Isabella would talk to Emily as though she was sitting right next to her. Things seemed normal at first. Brian was working and doing up the house. Laurel was raising Isabella, and it seemed as though Isabella was thriving. But things were about to take a turn for the worst. One day, Emily began making her presence known by throwing an ornament across the room, smashing it, and by telling Isabella that she didn't want her mum there, Laurel. Shadows started moving around the hallway when there were no lights to cause them. Finally, one day, Isabella came frightened and shaken to Laurel, saying that Emily's mother had hurt Emily in the bathtub. It was then that Laurel thought her daughter needed medical help. But, as they would soon find out, this wasn't the problem. One day, all the family photos had been removed off the wall and piled in the middle of the floor. No one was in the house at the time, but it was the ghostly white face that they saw watching them from the bedroom window on the second floor that made them finally take action. They went to see a medium to cleanse the house and to figure out why this was happening. What they found out was horrifying. This is Dark Mysteries Series 2, Episode 1, My Imaginary Friend. Hey guys, welcome to Project Dark Knight. If you're a fan of the strange, dark and mysterious, you've come to the right place, because I make videos on the supernatural, true stories, torture, top 10 ghosts, creepypastas and a lot more. So, if you're a fan of the supernatural or the dark and twisted, find the like button and jab a pencil in its eyes. Then subscribe to my channel, Project Dark Knight, for more horror. Isabella was a miracle for Laurel and Brian Poremski. They had lost 3 pregnancies and thought that they'd never be parents. Then, Isabella was born, and all their dreams were finally becoming a reality. 5 years down the line, Brian had a great job. Isabella was doing brilliant in school. In fact, she was ahead of other kids her age. The parents couldn't be happier. So, it was around this time they decided that they wanted to buy a house of their dreams with a white picket fence, and also the flat they were living in wasn't suitable for a growing family. So, they found a home which was perfect for them and their budget. They paid for the inspection and found out that the house of their dreams had a lot of structural damage and would cost a lot of money down the line years to come. While talking to the house owners, suddenly across the street they saw an old man putting out a sign on the lawn, for sale by the owner. It wasn't the house of their dreams, but they saw potential. What was strange though was that the owners had only lived there for a year and they were all ready to move out. What made them decide to buy the house was the price. The owners were selling the house very cheap in comparison to what the other houses in the area were going for. He also said that he would pay for all the closing costs. In hindsight, this should have been a warning to Laurel and Brian, but we've all been there and done that and made mistakes like this in the spur of the moment. They found a house that was going cheap in the neighborhood that they wanted and probably thought that this was a one-off chance which landed in their lap. Little did they know the real reason why the owners were selling so fast. Laurel said to her husband, "We're a young couple with a new child. Let's take this gift and move forward." So, they bought the house in Baltimore and were happy at first. They started with Isabella's room, but the walls were painted dark red, so they had to primer it first, but the red color kept bleeding through no matter what they did. It looked like the walls were actually bleeding. It took them 5 coats to cover it. Isabella now had her own bedroom and was happy with it at first. They started noticing that Isabella would always wave bye-bye to the attic door and smile. It was a little odd, waving at nothing, but at this point they weren't worried. They decided that Isabella must have had an imaginary friend. Kids do that sometimes, right? And they grow out of it. Not long after that, one day Laurel heard Isabella talking and singing. So Laurel asked Isabella who she's talking to. Isabella said Emily, as though Emily was sitting right next to her. When Isabella started talking to Emily, it was just for fun. They thought that this imaginary friend thing was just a phase, and let's be honest, so would a lot of other people. But then the couple started to notice things happening in their home, and at first, they blamed Isabella. One evening, mother and daughter were in the kitchen. Laurel was cooking and Isabella was playing nearby. Then, all of a sudden, she heard something hit the floor and smash. The first thing out of Isabella's mouth was, "Emily, that was bad. That belonged to Mummy." Laurel thought that Isabella had broken the porcelain statue and blamed on Emily. Her reaction was denial. She shook it out of her mind, but the look on Isabella's face wasn't so easy to ignore. Isabella had definitely seen something. Actually, what had just happened was that while Laurel was cooking and Isabella was playing in the kitchen floor, a cupboard opened up and a little porcelain statue had been thrown out and smashed across the room. This was the start of worse things to come. Then, Isabella said something that chilled Laurel and gave her a sense of dread. "Emily doesn't like you, Mummy. Emily doesn't want you to be here." Laurel felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. What do you say in that situation? From that day on forward, Mum and Dad noticed their daughter changing a bit. She started spending more and more time in her bedroom, and she started singing one song in particular over and over again. Mary Had a Little Lamb. Laurel had never taught Isabella this song, but it wasn't just the song, it was the way how she sang it, very slow and deliberate, and she wouldn't normally sing like that. Laurel went on investigation mode to find out who taught her that song. She asked the school and her friends' mums, and Brian too, but no one had taught her that song. She asked Isabella flat out who taught her that song and to sing like that. Isabella said, "But Mummy, I'm learning." But she wouldn't tell her mum who she was learning from. Laurel and Isabella were a tough young couple, living and raised in Baltimore. They didn't get scared easily, but one of the first times Brian ever felt uncomfortable was in the bathroom. He kept getting the feeling that he was being watched. Have you ever had that feeling, like someone is standing right behind you, or just entered the room? Well, I think sometime in our lives we all get that feeling. Brian was brushing his teeth one night when he felt a hand tug on his shirt, waist high. Straight away, he thought it was Isabella, so he started calling and looking for her. Suddenly, a big black shadow ricocheted off the bedroom door and fled into the hallway. Thinking it was a car light coming down the street, casting shadows, Brian looked out the bedroom window, but there were no cars, no lights, and even if there was, the road was straight. The lights wouldn't shine that way, and more importantly, they were on the second floor. That's when Brian realized something's going on, but he didn't say anything because he didn't want to scare and alarm his wife and daughter. Another night, Laurel was getting ready to give Isabella a bath when suddenly Isabella came running into the bedroom, frightened and shaking, saying, "Emily's mummy hurt Emily in the bathtub. Emily's mummy hurt her in the bathtub. Mummy, Emily's mummy is bad." Where would she get that information from? Even if she had an imaginary friend, that kind of information isn't something a 5-year-old would say. So, where was she getting that from? Laurel saw fear in Isabella's eyes that night. She grabbed Isabella and said sternly, "You have to say goodbye to Emily. Okay, Isabella? Tell her to go away and stop talking to her. She isn't good for you." Me personally, if this was happening in my house, I would have reacted like this a lot sooner. But it wasn't their fault. This Emily wasn't what she said she was, and very soon, the Poremskis would know the truth. What started out as an innocent, family, childlike behavior has turned into this dark, ugly thing. Could Isabella be making up this story? Laurel thought, what if she was making this up? Then that would mean she might need medical help. So Isabella was taken to see her pediatrician, and Laurel told the doctor everything in hopes of getting to the bottom of this mess. The pediatrician asked Isabella the name of her imaginary friend, which Isabella told her. Then the pediatrician said, "You know Emily's not real, right? You know that. She's just pretend." "She's not pretend," said Isabella. "She's standing right behind you." After the consultation, the pediatrician told Laurel not to worry. This was just a phase and it was normal. The next day, the family had a day out of the house and it was wonderful. They had a family day in the park and a bite to eat, and all day Isabella never once mentioned Emily. They never even heard the name being said. It felt normal again, and it felt great. Laurel and Brian thought that this Emily thing was over with and done. They had a great day out of the house and Isabella had fun. They came home and entered the front door, and all three stopped and stared. In the middle of the room, 20 to 30 family photo frames were all balancing on one another, facing down. The couple was speechless. They couldn't believe what they were seeing, not to mention that all of the picture frames were facing down as if someone or something didn't want to look at the happy family. But even more creepy was how they were balanced. Brian said he knew he didn't do it, and Laurel didn't do it, and Isabella couldn't even reach that high. Furthermore, they were all out when it happened. They both realized something doesn't want them there, and their daughter might be in danger. Laurel wanted to just walk out and leave everything, but financially, this wasn't an option, so they were stuck, and things were getting worse. Brian was in the bedroom, getting ready for bed, when Isabella came running in shouting, "Daddy, Daddy, there's a white face in the window." Brian ran out, and to his amazement, he saw the white face, and the white face saw him. Brian never believed in ghosts, but on that night, his beliefs changed forever. The vibe in their home was turning negative. It was turning dark now. So they decided to let Isabella stay at Brian's mum's house for a few days, and Laurel thought she'd brighten up Isabella's bedroom. She planned on a whole repaint, soft pastel colours, and to make a feature wall of the Wizard of Oz. They got new furniture in, and Laurel worked very hard on the Wizard of Oz theme. They wanted to make Isabella happy again. I get it, I really do. But I'm not being rude or judging here. I don't think drawing on a wall and painting was the best idea they could have come up with at the time. I'm no expert, but they should have got a priest in and seek professional help, like using holy water and like sealing the house with a cross. But like I said, I'm no expert, and who knows how you'd react in that situation. Their heart was in the right place and they loved Isabella, so they get a pass anyway. So, a couple of days later, Isabella comes home after spending the weekend at grandmother's, and she's surprised to see the bedroom. Even Brian's mum, Judy, was surprised because it looked as though a professional had decorated the room. Grandmother was so proud of Laurel's great job, and Isabella was even more happier. They all went downstairs and left Isabella to enjoy her new bedroom when suddenly there was a loud rumble and a crash. Mum and Dad and Grandmother came running up to Isabella's room and was shocked at what they saw. Isabella's bedroom was trashed. The bed and the drawers and the cupboard were all flipped over and on the floor, and the feature wall of the Wizard of Oz was slashed right down the middle. This happened so suddenly and in the space of about 20 seconds. Laurel shouted at Isabella, "Why did you do that?" But Isabella didn't say anything. She was in shock, having just witnessed something very close firsthand. Laurel was in denial and tried to ignore it, but Grandmother knew something was going on in the home and something needed to be done. That night, Grandmother stayed and was giving Isabella a bath when Isabella said something. "Nana, can I tell you something? Emily tells me to jump out of the window, and she'll catch me." Nana broke down, and through her tears she said, "It's not okay to jump out of the window. If you do, you'll get hurt and die. She knew that they had a serious problem on their hands, and if they didn't act fast, then Isabella was going to be taken away from them. They had no choice but to secure all the windows in the house, so Brian started securing planks on all the windows so Isabella couldn't jump out. This was insane. What if there was a fire and they needed to get out of the window, but they couldn't because Brian had secured each window closed tight? Laurel was depressed. This house was supposed to be a new start and a place to raise a child. She wanted to fill the house with love and light, but here they were securing all the windows closed. Brian said that if his daughter died, he'd have to die too, because he couldn't go on life without her. There was a rule that Isabella wasn't allowed anywhere near the basement. It was always a no-no, and Isabella found it creepy too. Isabella was playing on the kitchen floor and Mum was next to her cooking. They didn't like to leave Isabella alone anymore in case she got hurt. Suddenly, the basement door, which was behind Isabella, opened slowly and quietly. Then, Isabella was dragged so forcefully and fast across the kitchen floor and into the basement, down the stairs. Laurel feared the worst. If you've got kids, then you'll know how worried you'd get if they fell down the stairs. Luckily, Isabella wasn't badly hurt, just sore and bruised. "Mum," she said, "Emily just pulled me." Laurel was trying to be strong, but inside she felt defeated. She decided she could either just ignore it and let this drive her crazy, or she could stand up and fight. She wasn't going to let this Emily take her daughter, but how do you fight something you can't see? Finally, at last, Laurel and Brian found a medium who would come into their home and investigate what was going on. The medium came into Isabella's room and sat down and immediately started singing in a girl's voice. Mary had a little lamb, her fleece was white as snow. This was shocking, and now they believed everything the medium said, because she wouldn't have known about this song. And when she told them what to do, Brian and Laurel did it. Suddenly, the medium got possessed, and her voice changed into a man's voice, shouting over and over again, "Get the Bibles out, get the Bibles out." Unbelievably, Brian and Laurel did as was requested, and took both Bibles they had in the house and threw them out into the lawn. But the possessed medium didn't stop insisting. She kept repeating, "Get the Bible out, get the Bible out." "We only have 2 Bibles," Brian shouted. Then the medium said something that made them halt. The medium said, in her own voice, "He's very angry. He said there's another Bible in the house." This made both Mum and Dad stop and look at each other. She just said he. Their daughter had been talking to an Emily, not a he. The medium told them as long as there's a Bible in the house, the man won't speak to them. When I heard this bit of their accounts, I thought, don't take the Bibles out. Maybe that was their only protection, but they wanted to find out what this entity wanted, so they had to do what was asked. They turned Isabella's room upside down and found the Bible in her pillow. They didn't know Isabella had a Bible, and she didn't tell them about it. There was no way this medium could have known this. They believed everything the medium said after that. After the holy books were removed from the house, the medium made direct contact with the male entity. They found out through the medium that there wasn't an Emily. In fact, Emily was just a disguise to get close to their daughter Isabella. The real thing that was talking to the daughter and hurting her and scaring her was a demon, and he hated the family, especially Isabella, and he wanted to kill her so he could collect her soul. Brian and Laurel were so scared. It made sense now, and they understood why it was hurting Isabella and making their lives so miserable. Because the more the family feared and the more scared they were, the stronger the demon got. Demons are parasites who latch onto their host or environment and physically and emotionally drain the victims. Now they knew why this was happening. Brian started to pray and tried to get help for the situation. Isabella was in bed. He lit a candle and recited the Lord's Prayer, when suddenly the candle flew 4 to 5 feet across the room and hit the wall. The red candle wax ran down the wall and it looked like blood dripping, which was a bad sign. Brian said to his wife, "We have to get Isabella out of this house now." Before they could react, they both saw a massive shadow move on its own while no one else was in the room. It suddenly changed direction and flew across the room. Just then, Isabella's big toy chest came flying towards Brian. He managed to move out of the way as the wooden chest smashed into pieces behind him on the wall. Even after all of this, they still didn't leave. They couldn't. There was money tied up in the house. That night, it targeted Brian. While Brian was asleep, he got possessed. Laurel knew this wasn't her husband now. He loved and protected her. But now he had both his hands around her throat and was strangling her. Brian was possessed by this evil demonic entity and it wanted to kill Laurel. Brian lifted her up off the floor with one hand. Laurel still remembers that night very clearly. She believed that she was going to die and she thought Isabella would die next. The thought of young Isabella momentarily gave Laurel the strength and motivation she needed, and she managed to get away from Brian. She ran down the stairs and ran out of the front door, screaming for help. When they got to the road, she looked back. Puzzled look on his face. He asked her what had happened and why they were outside. He couldn't remember anything after going to bed. "Laurel, what are you doing? Are you okay?" he asked. Laurel could see in an instant Brian was back to himself, but he was just as afraid as she was. After seeing the bruises on his wife's neck, he said, "Let's go, we're leaving." They broke down crying, knowing that they had been beaten. Laurel started shouting, "Okay, you've won. We're leaving. The house is yours." She didn't care about the house anymore. As long as she was leaving with her husband and daughter, they were safe and that was all they cared about. They had been through so much. I feel so sorry for this young family. They didn't ask for much. All they wanted was a slice of happiness, a house with a white picket fence, barbecues with the neighbors, love and happiness with Isabella, but they couldn't stay there anymore. They fought. They might not have made all the right choices, but at least they tried, and they loved Isabella, and they just wanted to leave. The next day, they called another family member who told them that they should have called sooner. They didn't even pack anything. Brian didn't want to take anything from the house in case the object was possessed. Laurel threw a few things into the car and they left. It was a relief. As soon as they got a few streets away, they both felt as if the world was lifted off their shoulders, like they could breathe again. The family lost a lot because of this, but they walked away happy, healthy and stronger. They will never go back to that house, and Brian remarked that he'd rather live in the woods than go back to that house. Isabella recovered. This happened to her when she was 5 going on 6. She doesn't remember what happened to her, and her parents are happy she forgot. The house is still unlived in, and just sits there, empty. They could have easily sold the house to an unsuspecting family, but they think back to the man who sold them the house in the first place. He had only just lived there for a year. They remembered how the man was acting on the day that they spoke. Also, they remembered the man didn't want to talk to them inside the house, and when Brian and Laurel looked around the house, the man waited for them in the car. Now, they know why. Hey horror fans, so that was the true story of Brian and Laurel Poremski and their daughter Isabella from Baltimore. Don't worry, they're all fine and safe. The house is still dangerous, but at least it's unlived and unsold. So if you like that video, and if you're a fan of the strange, dark and twisted, then find the like button and jab a pencil in its eyes. Then subscribe to the channel, Project Dark Knight for more horror. I just wanted to take this time to mention that I'll be starting a couple of new series soon. The first one's going to be called Possessed, which is about people that were possessed or still are possessed by demonic forces. And the second one will be called Serial Killers and Psychopaths, which basically does what it says on the tin. Just remember this though, guys. I'm working very hard, so I need your help. So share the videos and subscribe to the channel so I can get my content out there and then make bigger and better productions. So thanks a lot, guys, for listening and watching the video. I love you all, and as usual, peace.
Don't ever laugh as the hearse goes by, for you may be the next to die. They wrap you up in a big white sheet, from your head down to your feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks.